Everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Reliance Partners Safety Matters webinar series. I'm your host, Thom Albrecht, and at Reliance, I am the CFO and Chief Revenue Officer. Today, we are going to be discussing a plethora of new regulations from the FMCSA, including nearly 1,400 new roadside violations. As in prior webinars, we welcome questions from the audience at any time by using the chat feature. Today's experts are Reliance's very own Mark Barlar and Daniel Vega. Guys, Happy New Year and welcome back to the show.
Welcome, Thom. Welcome, Daniel.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, good to see you again. While you have both been on previously, please take a moment to remind your folks of your background and what you do here at Reliance. Mark, let's start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Barlar. I'm a former DOT officer of over 22 years with the Wisconsin State Patrol. I retired back in 2020. Conducted about 10,000 inspections during my career. I was an instructor for FMCSA. I was certified to do the Part A program, which is your driver's hours of service, CDLs, medical qualifications, hazardous material inspection training program, and cargo tank inspection program. I'm happy to be here today.
And
Hi,
Daniel,
guys.
how about yourself? Yeah, sorry.
My name is Daniel Vega. I worked as a state trooper in Arizona for approximately 10 years. Most of my time was spent on the commercial vehicle enforcement squad working the southwest part of Arizona. During my time there, I took specialized training that allowed me to do roadside inspections, motor coach inspections, and hazardous material inspections. Then I moved over to the insurance industry. I started my insurance career with Nationwide Insurance as a loss control rep, working with accounts to improve their overall safety. I then moved over to my current role as Director of Safety, currently working with producers to help out our customers with anything dealing with safety, whether that's data queues, driver training, reviewing their cab report, mostly work in California, Arizona, and south part of Texas.
Yeah, trust me, folks, these guys are making a yeoman's difference in the work for our clients and prospects across the United States. Before we get into some of the actual roadside violation changes, and there's also some things going on with the drug and alcohol clearinghouse, with how data queues are going to be reviewed, et cetera. Mark, I'd like you to sort of give everyone a little bit of the background behind the CSA prioritization preview that began last February. It was open for comments until mid-May. Just walk us through the timeline of what happened last year to get us to this point here in early 2024.
Gotcha. So in the middle of February of 2023, FMCSA came out with a proposal to change up how CSA scores are generated. They opened up a comment period until the middle of May, of which there was over 100. I want to say there's about 177 comments that were made during that time period. They advertised it, they put out training, they put out a website to where you actually go and check what your new CSA scores would do. If anybody on this webinar, because I'm going to start sharing a screen here in a little bit, if you guys want to go to the FMCSA prioritization preview, go ahead and just do a Google search for it and go to it, because I'm going to share a screen here. I'm going to show some of the changes that have been made that they didn't tell you about. And one thing they didn't tell you about is starting in March of 2023, they put out a new CSA methodology manual, and they added in a ton of violations.
Well, it sounds like somebody was having a bad day at the FMCSA. Well, Mark, when I look at that prioritization website, it states that there are still just 959 roadside violations, but now the reality is there's almost 2,340 that are going to impact CSA scores. Was this just a case of the FMCSA and someone having some bad eggnog in the latter part of last year, or actually begin to walk us into this, this sort of abyss of new regulations?
I believe what had happened was with the implementation or partial implementation of the new CSA prioritization. They haven't implemented it completely, but what they did was they just added a bunch of violations, designations, making it more granular in how you can see the different parts of a commercial motor vehicle that are governed by regulations. No new regulations were brought in to the CSAs. I'm going to make the change on that. No new regulations were made, okay? But they did add a bunch of little granular type of violations coding that really drilled down into the type of violation that was found. And if you allow me, I want to share my screen here real quick of the prioritization so everybody can follow along.
All right, let's take a look at it. Okay, I can see it.
Okay, so we have the prioritization preview, and as I scroll down, it's a pretty well-rounded website, what gives us information on enhancing SMS to improve the safety. And when we look at this, you can see the new methodology will organize the existing 959 roadside violations into 116 violation groups. Well, that's great, because if you got a couple of violations listed it within one group, then those violations would start canceling them out, and only one would count towards CSA scores. But what they didn't tell anybody, and they're not advertising, is you click here on the new roadside violation groups, it will list out all the violations that could be listed when they implemented this new methodology on how to obtain CSA scores. And when I started looking through this, I was amazed. We're going from 959 violations, and I'm just looking at a group under vehicle maintenance driver observed. And if we scroll down, we're looking at approximately, oh my God, I'm in cell 700. These are all violations that they want to add in. We're looking at, it stops at cell 861. So we're looking at 858 violations that can be cited at roadside during a roadside inspections just for the vehicle maintenance observed. Well, what has happened now is they implemented this portion of it. They implemented this. They brought in all the new violation codes the following month. They didn't tell anybody about it. They just put on their SMS website, hey, we have a new methodology. In the old methodology book, you can look, it's in PDF. You could actually go through and look up each code. Can't do that anymore with the new methodology designators. You have to download an Excel spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, you're going to see that they have broken out violation coding for lighting for clearance lights and marker lights and identification lights and license plate lights. Well, what's really interesting here is not only did they partially implement this, only certain states are using it right now. Arizona is one, Missouri, Wisconsin, and there's many states that are not. They haven't fully implemented this. So when they added in all of these different violations, we don't have 959 violations that can be cited at roadside. We're looking at about 2,400 violations that can be cited during roadside, the bulk of which are in vehicle maintenance and hazardous materials compliance. We're going to see that there are over 800 violations that can be cited during a roadside for hazardous materials violations. We're looking at 894 of those. Another interesting item to observe is right now there's approximately 46 unsafe driving violations. Well, with the new coding, there's 142. So they added quite a bit. And if the state is operating off of the new software, they can use these codes right now. If you look back, and some carriers will be on here right now, you can look back at some of the violations that are listed on inspection reports, and you'll start seeing codes that you've never seen before. And if you do a search for those codes, you won't be able to find it in the old methodology book. You actually have to look for them in the new appendix that FMCSA had put out with the new point values. And where this becomes, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No. Go ahead and finish.
All right. And so what's happening now is they've actually increased some point values for some of the violations that are listed. And they brought violations that didn't have any point values that now do have a point value. And one example is identification lights. If you got a code on a violation or on an inspection report of 393 9A or BLIL, it's now a 6-point violation when before, this is the point value here, where before it would be a 2-point violation. Now with the old inspection programs of Inspect and Aspen, when they wrote a violation for a clearance light, a marker light, an identification light, and a license plate light, those all use the coding of 393.9A, which is a 2-point violation. And if they wrote all 4 of those, 3 of them would cancel out because, you know, they're the same coding. Well, with the new coding, identification light is 6 points. A marker light is 6 points. The license plate light is 6 points. And then the clearance light stays as 2 points. And they all have different coding, so they don't cancel each other out anymore. So whereas before you could have 4 lighting violations on 4 different areas of the vehicle and account for 2 points, now you go over to the next state over using the new software, you're looking at 6 points plus 6 plus 6 plus 2. You're looking at 20 points for those same lights, and they all count.
Oh my goodness, that's a huge difference. So that's a lot for motor carriers to digest. I can't imagine what law enforcement officials are thinking about or experiencing. Is there going to be additional training for officers to make sure that they have a good understanding of all this extra granularity? Daniel, what do you think?
So I actually spoke to somebody who does inspections currently, and they're using the new system. And he said the training was geared more towards how the system works. And I asked him, how many violations are you guys able to enforce? And he said thousands. And he said, basically, it's just picking the correct violation.
Oh my. So is it too much to expect that, you know, Mark, you mentioned that there's a number of areas where the point total is going up. I don't suppose there were any examples where the point total for a violation went down, right?
That has not been the case as of yet. I have not seen that. And with the addition of so many new different types of coding of violations, a client of mine the other day sent me an inspection report that had 2 of the same violations, and it was a air hose chafing underneath the vehicle. So one coding used different wording. It said vacuum hose chafing underneath the vehicle, and then a brake hose was chafing underneath the vehicle. Used almost the exact same wording. Well, we all know that vacuum hoses have gone away in the 70s and maybe early 80s was the last time they were really used on commercial motor vehicles. So now you got those two violations, which should be used the same coding. Since they didn't pick the correct one for the first one, they're both counting against them. Now we have to do a data queue to get that taken off. And if you're a state like Illinois, it takes 3 months to respond to a data queue. Those point values are going to sit on your CSA profile until they respond to the data queue. Now, thankfully, this inspection was not conducted in Illinois. They're still using the old software. That's one good thing about Illinois. But yeah, I have to do a data queue for this because the inspecting officer chose the wrong coding, which brought in different wording. It's all about the coding. If the coding is different for the violation section, then it is going to add points to your CSA profile.
That's crazy. We're going to keep coming back and forth between this, but I also know that Daniel's been spending some time understanding some changes to the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse and the impact that may have to CDLs. Daniel, you want to take it away from there?
So yeah, the biggest change that's going to be happening is the state licensing agency will be revoking CDL privileges if prohibited in the clearinghouse. So these changes are going to be occurring later on in 2024, November to be exact. It's going to require the state licensing agency to revoke the CDL within 60 days that driver is prohibited. So your license is ultimately going to be revoked until you complete the return of duty process and the state reinstates your driver's license. But if that return of duty process is completed before the downgrade, then technically your CDL is still valid. So right now, if you run a MVR currently, it might show that your driver has a valid CDL, but if he's prohibited in the drug and alcohol clearinghouse, he's still not able to drive. So it might show his license might be revoked because right now it's voluntary for these states to run these queries. It's not mandatory until November of 2024.
So Daniel, let me take that one step farther. I think right now a failed drug test results in one violation, but as we think through the new violation that are coming out of this, wouldn't this be two violations going forward? One would be a violation for testing positive for either drugs or alcohol or both. And then secondly, not having a valid driver's license. Is that correct?
So yeah, it affects, it's going to have double effect come when they do move to the new safety categories. So you're going to get two violations. One is going to be, they're both going to be out of service violations, but one's going to be basically you're prohibited in the clearinghouse, and that's going to fall under the unsafe basic once the new basics come in effect. But as of right now, it's still going to fall under the drug one. And then
And
you're
what's
also
the timeline? You mentioned when it happens. Isn't that something like in the fourth quarter, I thought?
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't really got an update of when these new safety categories are going to take effect, but for the clearinghouse, it's November of 2024. But then you're also receiving that violation for your driver having a CDL that's revoked, and that's going to fall under driver fitness. So you're basically getting two out of service violations if you're not taking care of this. So something that I would strongly recommend to companies is if that driver is going to be continue to be employed by you after the return of duty process is completed, make sure his license is valid before you let him drive that truck.
How much are the point violations on those two situations? The failed drug or alcohol test and failing to have a valid or current driver's license?
So I haven't looked at the new point system, but I can almost guarantee you they're 10 points each.
Okay. And before it would have been just 10 overall. So now it's a potential doubling.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Mark, let's go back to you for a moment. So you mentioned an example with lights. We can kind of, pick words a little bit, whether it's new violations or just greater granularity around those violations. For example, you talked about before it was just lights, but now you've got separate breakouts for brakes, identification lights, license plate lights, markers, clearance lights, etc. With only clearance, I think, being 2 points, the others being 6. But let me give you a different example. So let's say my truck gets inspected in Missouri and a violation is documented for having an ID lamp that's out and a license plate lamp that's out. How many points would that be? And would the point total be different in a state not using the new software? I mean, it starts to get real confusing here because not all 50 states are on the new software yet. So start with that example of a violation in Missouri and walk us through a little bit.
So what'll happen in Missouri, you get that inspection done and you say you have an identification light out and it's properly documented. That's going to come into your CSA profile as a 6-point violation. You drive across the border to a state such as Illinois, and I don't know if they're using the new software. I haven't seen that they've used the new software yet, but they're still using the old software and they get the same violation on the same day, a couple hours later. And it'll be a 2-point violation that'll show up. So it'll affect the carrier differently operating in states that have the new updated software until it's fully implemented. Now, what will happen in the future, hopefully this happens in the future, is that they fully implement the new CSA prioritization, and now we go down to from those 2,400 violations into 116 violation groups. That will help tremendously. But as of right now, they took the prioritization violation list and combined it with the SMS list, and not everybody's using it. So people that get stopped in the states that are using it are getting hammered with um, points versus for CSA, for vehicle maintenance, controlled substances. It doesn't matter what it is, because there's so many more violations that can be documented on each one versus the older list and the older software. So you get stopped in one state, they're treating you a little bit differently in CSA versus going to another state, which is unequal when comparing carrier operations across the United States.
That's
I, I,
crazy.
I don't know if FMCSA realizes this is happening.
And there's no hard deadline for states to adopt the updated software?
From what I have seen, FMCSA investigating officers, so those working at the border, the auditors that go out and do their 32 level ones a year, they started using this new software. I think the first time I saw it was in April of last year. And then I saw a couple of states starting to use it in June or July. Now, come October, November, and December, a lot more are using it. I saw that New York was using it. Utah is now using it. I haven't seen California use it as of yet, but they're a massive state, and I'm sure they're going to get on board with it. And I'm sure there's a deadline, but I haven't seen what that is.
Okay. Daniel, another
Yep.
thing that's at work is in the state of California for intrastate moves. There's an interesting change there as well. You want to talk to our audience about that, given the huge amount of freight that is moved in and around California?
Yeah, but before I jump into that, I kind of want to
Yeah.
touch on something with the clearinghouse before we move on. So in 2023, and this is more a recommendation for you guys to be on top of this. 2023 clearinghouse, if you have a driver that's prohibited, it actually sends you a notification to your email that his status changed in the clearinghouse. So you guys need to pay close attention to that and check why his status was changed. That way you won't allow him to continue driving a commercial motor vehicle. So we can move into the California now. So like Thom was mentioning, effective January 1st, 2024, California is requiring all intra-state motor carriers to have an ELD to record their record of duty status. So it basically falls under similar to the FMCSA mandate a couple years ago. So if that carrier is operating outside the 150 air radius mileage for local carriers, 8 days within a 30-day period, okay, you're exempt from having that ELD. If the company's doing drive-away towaway operations, transporting empty vehicles, or for lease, they're exempt as well. Or if the vehicle is manufactured before the year 2000, or if FMCSA has a waiver or exemption that doesn't require to have an ELD. So that came down starting this month. So if you're an intrastate carrier in California, I would strongly recommend you install those ELDs because there's no grace period.
Okay, we're starting to get a few questions from the audience. Let me see here. Somebody had a question right where you were talking about there, Daniel. Well, let me go back here. Someone asked again, can we have the link with the new SMS? Mark since you had a screenshot earlier, maybe you can share that, and then I'll peruse the question here.
Sure. I'm going to share my screen here because I do have it up.
Yep.
So if you just type in FMCSA SMS for a Google search, it's going to come up. The first one, you can click on it. It's going to bring you to this page here, SMS Safety Measurement System. And you want to click on the link, understand the SMS methodology. You click on that, and that's going to give you the new PDF. The last one that was made was in October of 2023. Now, that new methodology, when it downloads, is not going to give you the point values as it did with the old ones. So what you need to do is scroll all the way to the last page in the list, and you'll see here there's a link to SMS Appendix A spreadsheet. You click on that, and it's going to download. And when it downloads, I'm going to open it up here. You're going to see that there is going to be about 20 different tabs in there. And they're all kind of out of order. They start with unsafe driving, and there's a bunch of tabs to the right, and then it'll go to, I think, hours of service, and there'll be a bunch of tabs, and there'll be what's currently there, and then there'll be the tab to the right of it that says, all right, these new violations were added on 3 of 23. Actually, I believe it'll say February 1 of 23, but they didn't publish it until the following month. And then to the right of that will be a bunch of tabs that talk about when violations were taken out of the SMS. And then you'll get to the new section of, let's say, controlled substances. You'll say what's currently there, and then new ones that were added. Those all have the point values. So you got to do a search for when you're looking at what those new point values are going to be. Now, what's interesting is like I said, the old software, there may be, and here are the thing, violations added 10 of 23. There's just a lot of tabs that are listed here. And as I go through, you can see all the tabs that are listed there. The ones that you want are going to be the basic category tabs. And then the category tabs that talk about updated, like this unsafe driving added to 1 of 2023. That's the new stuff that was added. So it's a combination of unsafe driving. The new coding is the combination of the unsafe driving and the unsafe driving added to 1 of 2023. Now, when you're on those individual pages, you can do a Control F and do a search for the code. If you don't find it on one page, it will be on the other. I can guarantee it. And you can see all the different types of violations that have been added in as of 2/1 of 2023. So other violations that were added that didn't have a point value, there is a violation in 396 for vehicle maintenance. It says all drivers have to be adequately trained in the regulations regarding vehicle maintenance. Well, prior to 2/1 of 23, that violation could have been written, but it's 0 points. Now they added a point value to it. So in the new state, the states with the new software, you're going to get hit with that violation. It's going to hit your vehicle maintenance. And the other states with the old software, it's not. So what do we need to do? What's the takeaway from this? Is one, we need to be cognizant that there is an inequality in the states here, and that's something that you can actually contact your legislators on and talk to them about. Say, hey, implement this new program. If you're going to implement it, don't partially implement it, please, because not everybody's being treated equally here. And if they do implement it, I think that at least that portion of 116 groups is awesome, because that will help out with some scores. Now, we're all of us in safety. Unless you have been doing enforcement on these regulations for years, because new people, they make mistakes all the time. It takes time to learn all the little nuances when it comes to the different types of lights, where they belong, the colors, and whatnot. Now we got to be experts too. we got to teach our drivers every little thing that is out there, every little type of violation that can be observed by a driver. We got to train our mechanics. This is what the DOT is looking for. So they understand exactly all the little nuances that are there. You know, I think FMCSA did the industry a little bit of a disservice by not advertising, hey, we're adding in these violations. They're still advertising there's 959 current ones. No, there's not. There's actually over 3,000. I know we said 2,400, but there's almost 1,000 violations that could be cited that still don't carry CSA points. And this is from somebody that's in the industry that told me about this. They actually go over and look at these inspection reports. So you know, your registration still won't count, your IFTA violations, your insurance violations, they don't count towards CSA scores. Where anything to do with the federal motor carrier safety regulations, most of them will. Now, I was going to try and look for that 396 violation. 396 point, I want to say it's 4 or 3, one of the two. But that might just take up a little bit too much time when we look for something.
Well, if you find something good while you're looking at it, we are
Mhm.
starting to get a few questions, and the first one is oriented towards Daniel. Let's see, I just lost that here. Basically, if you're going to get a notification on the status of a driver who's had a change, Daniel, would that motor carrier still be required to run them in a limited queue every year?
Yeah, so once you get that notification, you're basically within 24 hours, you got to go into the clearinghouse and would recommend doing a full query to see if the reasoning behind the status change on that notification.
So focus on the reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then we had another question here. The individual says, we had a similar situation with brake hoses, 2 violations under the same code, 393.45B, 2PC. Let's see here. One is,
For the service line is one, it's for the emergency line.
yeah.
So those are old codings yet. And if you have 2 violations with the exact same code, one is going to count towards CSA, the other will not. Now, if they break those 2 apart, where it says that 393.45 B2PC for like a service line and E, then those will break apart at that point, and one will be 4 points and the other one will be 4 points. I'm gonna do a search for it real quick to see if that is actually in there, because that's a very good question.
Is that one you could do a data queue challenge on, Mark?
No, because they are the same regulation. We
Okay.
have to understand that the regulation is the 393.45, and it'll probably be paragraph B, paragraph 2. The PC is the designator. That's the code that they're using to assign points in SMS, right? When it comes to this 393, I would keep going back to the lighting because it's such an easy regulation. 393.9A states that all required lighting in 393.11 must be operational at all times. So they do the 393.9A code dash LIL for identification light, LCL for clearance light. They change up those codes so SMS can assign those points. LIL never existed before. LCL never existed before. LML never existed before. And now still find it incredible that some states are enforcing it and others aren't, and carriers are being treated not equally across the United States. It just floors me here.
Okay, we've got a question, Daniel. I think it's oriented towards you. You may have seen it in the chat room, but how can a driver finish the SAP program within 60 days if the the SAP doctor provides him different plans for doing drug tests? For example, first year, 10 times during the drug test. My question's kind of cutting off here. Let me see if I can get it. Do you see it, Daniel, where you can see the whole thing?
Let me see if I can pull it up.
It's in the chat as opposed to the Q&A.
Mhm.
Mark, if you see it, maybe you could read it, well,
Yeah.
because it was cutting off on me.
So,
Regarding the
so-
SAP program, I would like to ask how a driver can finish the SAP program within 60 days. If SAP doctor provides him different plan for doing drug tests, example, first year equals 10 times drug test.
yeah, it's kind of what I would what I would recommend is in that case, he's gonna have to. There's no way he's gonna finish in 60 days, so he's gonna have to go through the reinstatement process with the state to get his CDL valid again.
Okay, so in other words, he's just kind of screwed
Yeah,
in that
just-
situation.
Yeah, situational.
Someone sort of captures the sentiment here. There's already too many subsections of the violations. How are we supposed to keep up with them? Let's
This is
see
why
here.
you contract with Reliance Partners for your insurance. You get access to myself and Daniel Vega. That's
Yeah,
how.
there you go. One of you guys, while I hand off the next question to you verbally, someone's asking is, can you put the link to download the spreadsheet in the chat? They were not able to follow you when you did the screen share. So let's see here. So Mark, why don't you do that? And then, okay, someone actually was kind enough to do that. Here we go.
Oh, we got the violation list in there from Izatula. Sorry if I butchered your name. And then I put the methodology in there. So we got the violation list and the methodology, one right after the other.
We've got a individual who also sent in, it's a partial comment and a partial question. This seems like a more of a financial incentive for states and insurance companies and others rather than a safety issue. With all these new violations being added, how can a company walk away with a clean inspection? So that's really the question after the comment. Daniel, why don't you try to give an answer to that? Because it does seem to be very frustrating. Like they're out to get you. More categories. You could argue that, okay, maybe there's technically not new regulations, but the more granularity things are laid out, the more even the best intentioned, patrol person is going to have ways to think of things while they're walking around the truck.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot more violations written. I get that, but I think this new system might help the company in the way that it's going to break it down by, like, for example, vehicle maintenance. It's going to be vehicle maintenance and driver observed. So it kind of gives you an idea of where you're having your issues when you're trying to work with your safety program for your company. I mean, yeah, I know it's negative. There's like 3,000 violations, like Mark said, but at the end of the day, there's nothing we could do. That's the feds coming down with those regulations, but I think using this new system might be helpful for you.
Well, checking on lights is always part of a good pre-trip, post-trip, and mid-trip if you're taking a break type of inspection or walkthrough. So should reinforce that more than ever. Mark, let me ask you a question. So now they're breaking out categories for a steer tire versus a regular tire. Technically, there's no regulatory change. Why are they breaking this out between a steer tire and a regular tire? Is it all about points, or is there some other higher purpose thereafter?
I think that there's a higher purpose for it, and that is it kind of takes it away from the inspecting officer to write down additional information identifying which tire it was and what the issue for the tire was. Is it a cut in the sidewall that exposes more than one ply? Is it a separation of the sidewall? Are there abrasions in it? So they break that down for the steer tires versus non-steer tires. Just because steering tires are, I'm guessing, are very much more important than any other tire in there, right? So I think it's for that. What's going to be a problem is there's going to be so many different violations to choose from that an officer can inadvertently choose the wrong one, which I gave the example from before. They're talking about a vacuum line being abraded versus an air hose line. And when they already have another air hose line that was abraded listed on the inspection report, you're looking at 2 4-point violations that are going to count against you. Now we have to do a data queue to get the violation changed over to the correct coding. So realistically, it's more on the safety managers when you get those inspection reports for violations to make sure that they're using the correct coding, which comes into the wording. It's taken the thought process out of the inspecting officer by having that language automatically put in on the inspection report, and they don't have to add too many of their own notes. That's where it's going to help and hurt the officer, because I've seen lazy officers do this. Well, this is what the heading says, so this must be the violation, versus reading the regulation and finding out, oh, that encompasses a bunch of stuff, this heading, but it doesn't encompass this situation here because this is what the regulation actually says.
Mark, I can envision a scenario where a really thorough officer is probably going to be more thorough in a way where there's going to be fewer data cues that can be challenged against him because he's going to be more granular than ever. But I can also see others just relying on the headlines and getting a little bit lazy, which then provides an open door for you to do a data queue challenge, because when the descriptions are inaccurate or incomplete, that's one of the openings you look for, correct?
That is absolutely correct. And then we look for to make sure that if it's listed as out of service, it's listed in the out of service criteria, what level of inspection that it was, and it complies with the level of inspection that was completed. If it's a hazardous material inspection, that they put down that whether or not it was a placardable load or not. All of those things make a difference, because, let's say you got a placardable load of hazmat, and you got 5 different violations on it, but they didn't list it as a placardable load on the inspection. You know what's going to happen? Those violations aren't going to count towards their SMS. Now, in reverse, let's say you're hauling class 9 materials, which never needs placarding, and you got a hazmat violation for the placards, a violation for the UNID numbers. Those are 5 points each, 10 points for hazmat, and they put it down as a placardable load. Well, now they're going to generate scores for something they shouldn't generate scores for. So, I look into all of those things to make sure that everything is done correctly. Another big one, just saw an inspection report come across my desk that says, hey, this was a post-crash inspection. Well, none of the violations that were listed as being caused by the crash. So if there's a column, they'll say crash. And if it has a Y in it, that means yes, it was caused by the crash. That violation won't count towards your CSA score. But if it says N there, and it's an area that was just destroyed during the inspection and everything is listed as N, then every violation was listed is going to count towards your SMS score. It will. And we have to do a data queue challenge to have the inspection report changed to reflect that violation there was caused by the crash. Just little nuances like that if you are unaware of, how the inspection report is uploaded up to FMCSA and how that affects your SMS score, you may never realize that this shouldn't affect your scores. And that's part of the reason why, I help out my customers. Just another way to help them out.
We've got a few more questions that are still in the queue. Someone said, I have Reliance as my insurance provider. I was never made aware of any help from anyone to look at these new violations, et cetera. I would just say, first of all, thank you for joining us today, and hopefully you're learning a little bit. Secondly, feel free to ping that insurance agent and remind them you want to hear any and all safety updates and safety regulatory changes, et cetera, throughout every calendar year. But I would also say, in defense of that person, it's probably the same case at a lot of agencies across the United States. When it comes to safety and regulatory changes, that can be overwhelming for a lot of agents because they're trying to service their customers in other ways. And that's why we have a team of 4 safety professionals here. So and if that answer wasn't satisfactory to you, you can also send me an email from our website, and I'll be happy to, have a further conversation offline. Let's see here. Another question. Okay. Are these think the question is still there. It just vanished. Yeah.
I'm seeing a question that says, if we get the notification for the driver status change in the clearinghouse by email, but the driver is no longer with the company, are we still required to run a query? And the answer is you won't be able to, because if you're running a full query, he has to give authorization. So what I would do is I would document it. Documenting it is the best way to go in case something comes up later down the road.
And here's something else that we should also do. Make sure you have clear documentation of when the driver left the company or was terminated from the company, because it is not uncommon for a driver to use his old company's information on the side of their new truck without ever letting you know. This happens quite a bit.
Here's another question. Are these violations like your driving record? In other words, do they stop affecting your scores after a certain period of time? Of course, the answer is yes, but Mark or Daniel, one of you explain how long.
So CSA scores affecting the motor carrier will stay on your profile for 2 years. It will affect the driver on their pre-employment screening program for 3 years. So it actually affects the driver more than it affects the company. But yeah, for all of you motor carriers out there, definitely use the pre-employment screening program, because you can identify drivers that don't do proper pre-trips pretty quick if you see violations that they should have caught and gotten fixed prior to being inspected.
Okay, so 2 years for the CSA score, 3 years on the pre-employment screening. Okay, good. These have been some good questions. We've got a few more minutes in case others are out there. And if not, I want to ask, and we'll continue to look. So don't be discouraged if you think of something 2 minutes from now. But Mark, let me ask a different question here. I'm just trying to think of hypotheticals here. I had kind of written one out here yesterday. So I think this category used to be a 0, but now it's going to be some points, either 4 or 6 points. But it used to be that if a driver was unfamiliar with the regulations regarding the vehicle regulations, I think around maintenance maybe, or other regulations, it was not a violation, but now it is. Can you just talk about that one a little bit?
Yes, so this is one of the violation categories that was added in 2/1 of 23. It is a 396.1 violation. I'm going to bring it up. I believe it is, there it is, 396.1A-IMC, and they got a 1-knowledge. That's the coding that they're using. And it is a violation for inspection, failing to be knowledgeable and or comply with the requirements of Part 396. This isn't a new violation, a new regulation. That thing has been there forever. Rarely gets cited at roadside, but I've been seeing it a little bit more and more. It didn't have CSA points prior to 2/1 of 23, and it still doesn't have CSA points if they're using the old software, but the new software is going to be a 4-pointer. The other one is failing to have knowledge of and comply with the federal motor carrier safety regulations of this part. Now, that is a very subjective regulation, subjective on what the officer's idea is, what is adequate knowledge of that part. If you talk to the officer, I can guarantee you they can't list everything that's listed out in Part 396. And it's only for Part 396. It's not for Part 393. It's not for Part 395. It's only for 396. And that's very limited in its scope of the regulations. So
sometimes sorry, Mark, sometimes these regulations seems like something George Orwell might have tried to write about in either Animal Farm or 1984, where, the government just has more and more power there, but that's sort of a, inside joke. We do have another question here. I got a 393.9 and a 393.9H on the same inspection. Can that be data queue challenged?
All right. So the 393.9 is old coding, as well as the H. The H means that the headlight was inoperative. The 393.9, that's going to be a clearance light, marker light, identification light, a license plate light. That's a 2-point violation. You're not going to win that on a data queue. You're not. The only thing you got to remember, the only thing that we're going to be able to win on data queues are things that have been cited wrongly, right? So if they use the wrong coding and the wording doesn't match the violation, we can data queue it to have it changed over. Now, I always stress that if you're going to have a violation change, make sure that what they're changing it to is the same or less amount of points. We don't want to go in and do a data queue and have points added to it. The state of Pennsylvania, this is what happens when you do a data queue through the state of Pennsylvania. They will look at the entire inspection report and they have an expert look at it. And if there's added violations that should have been there that would increase the point value or would do more damage to our company, they will add it. They're adamant about that. I talked to them on the phone and they said, our FMCSA division administrator, which is the head FMCSA guy for Pennsylvania, tells the state, yeah, go ahead and add those violations in if they're warranted. So you got to be careful on what you're going to data queue to make sure that there's no other way that points can be added on.
Here's another listener comment, partial question. I wish data queue was a more efficient system because we've received violations for drivers, for a driver, I should say, that was not our driver, nor had our markings on the truck he was driving. And data queue acknowledged the error, but never corrected our record. So it affected our insurance rate and our SMS score. Mark, do you have any advice there? Because you've
Yes.
had, you're successful over 70% of the time with data queues. Quick thoughts?
So what you need to do then is, first step is you go back into that data queue and open it back up, right? If you've only data queued it once and did one, and that's the only response, and they said, yeah, we're going to correct it, but they never corrected it, you go back to that data queue and you open it back up and says, hey, this is still showing on our SMS profile. Take a screenshot of it, put it in a Word document, and add that Word document to the data queue, showing that it's still on their profile. Okay. If they said, no, we're showing that it was taken care of on our end, you can actually, when you look at the data queue responses, there's a name and a phone number of the person that responds to you. You can call that phone number and talk to them. I've done that many times. And then you can explain the situation. If that's still their feeling, say, hey, we got this uploaded correctly, and this has happened to me before as well. No, we have it uploaded correctly. Everything looks good in our system. Then you go to the SMS system. There you can provide feedback as well. And they're very responsive when you say, hey, this is showing on my profile. I won this data queue. Why is this still showing on my profile? They will actually give you a call and try to help you figure it out. Right. And when it came to this process, when I called for one of my clients, it came out that, oh, there were 2 inspection reports that were uploaded. But the state didn't know it. They saw it in the SMS and they took out the one that had the incorrect information, and that was corrected before. Now there is another state that's out there that is having all kinds of problems when it comes to intermodal chassis, when violations shouldn't be attributed to the motor carrier. Sometimes they're being attributed to the motor carrier and they say, no, we're good. We got it uploaded here. They're still having problems in getting that information removed and corrected. And I've been working on this for one of my clients for 6 months. Now we're working with FMCSA to see what's going on with Illinois when doing that. So when it comes to doing data queues, we just don't sit with the data queue. Sometimes we call the agency. Sometimes we call FMCSA. Sometimes we call the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance to get clarification on it, on items. For example, one of my clients got a violation for mismatched brake chambers on an axle. Well, one brake chamber was a type 30 clamp chamber. The other brake chamber on the other side was a type 30 long stroke. I'm like, I remember from my training, they said, hey, type 30 is type 30. It's all about the diaphragm size inside the canister. It has nothing to do with long stroke versus regular stroke. Reached out to CVSA, and those are the experts, and they are very knowledgeable people. They're the ones that come out with inspection processes. They're the ones that are providing all the training now to all the states. And they responded, you are correct. So I'm going to be data queuing that here in the next day or two.
Couple of other comments from the audience. Someone said scale pre-pass services looking better than ever now. 100% agreed. Back to the other data queue challenge, the individual responded. We opened it multiple times for months and spoke to them, and it still wasn't corrected after they said they would correct it. We got no help. What I would suggest to that individual is ask your insurance agent at Reliance, if you're with Reliance, hey, can I speak to Mark Barlar? He's really our data queue specialist. All of our safety guys can do that, but Mark's had just an unbelievable track record in that arena. We'd love to help you. Yeah, in Mark we trust. Yeah, exactly. I get that.
Well,
we do have a question here. I have a situation where I was cited for a 393.201A cracked frame, and I have a steel frame aluminum bed trailer. It was the aluminum bed that was cracked on the side. Is that something that can be challenged?
Well, it all comes down to what type of trailer is it? Is it a flatbed trailer? Is it a van trailer? How is it constructed? Is it a cargo tank that forms a part of the trailer? Where was that aluminum crack at? So very difficult to answer that one. If you got a van trailer and you have the upper rail and the lower rail and there's cracks through that opens up when there's nothing we can do about that, because with a van trailer, the entire construction of that van trailer provides the support for that van trailer, if that makes sense. It's kind of a unibody thing where the entire vehicle is the support system.
Mark, it's a step
trailer. The crack was on the side under the logistics rail. I would have to have like a overview of the trailer, a photo of it, and then close up of where that crack, exactly where that was. Step deck trailers, you have some that they're heavy haul and some that are not heavy haul. It all depends on where that was and if it's a load bearing section that was a part of the frame. So that's a very difficult one.
So is that something that if they're using Reliance, they could take some pictures and send it to the agent and they can reach out to you or what?
Yeah, that's exactly what can happen. You talk to your agent, say, hey, I hear you guys got a safety team. I was on Safety Matters. Can you get me in touch with them? His name is Daniel Vega. No, you absolutely.
I'll be happy to help.
No, I think anyone on the team could have or help out with that question. It definitely was not a load bearing section. So at least that's a small part. Yes, and feel free to reach out. We
do have more than just myself and Daniel Vega. Our safety team is comprised of former CDL drivers that have been driving in the industry for 20 years, former FMCSA investigator of the year. We have a wealth of knowledge that covers the entire spectrum from operation all the way to regulatory compliance, roadside inspections. And then when FMCSA comes in and says, we're going to shut you down because you got an unsatisfactory, we can get you back to either unrated or whatever your rating was prior to the inspection. We provide those services to our clients, or sometimes at a cost if you're not our client.
All right, that's great. We're right at an hour right now, and I've got a couple of exciting updates to share before we wrap it up here. First of all of our episodes, so episodes 1 through 4, are now available on YouTube, today being episode 4, so it'll take a day or so before it's released there. And by the end of next week, we should have all of the Safety Matters episodes available on the various podcast formats. So Apple, YouTube, Google, there's several podcast formats, Spotify. And so we're really excited to be able to push this out into a broader format so drivers on the road can listen, motor fleets that are trying to be safe and they remember, later this year that, hey, I know these guys spoke about what to do at the scene of an accident, et cetera. All of that's going to be available in the various podcast forums. So look for that. Listen, on behalf of Reliance Partners, I want to thank Mark and Daniel. And most of all, I'd like to thank our audience. This was an incredible session today. More questions than we've ever had. There's a lot more coming down the pipeline later in the year. Some changes to the crash preventability, the SID lists, some things with MVRs, a whole bunch of things. So we look forward to addressing various safety and regulatory changes throughout the calendar year. Our next webinar will be in approximately 4 weeks. We'll know that date here in about a week. But as I wrap it up, thanks again for joining us, and everyone have a great Thursday evening. Take care.